see you guys in the dark.
I live in an old apartment building. I've been here for about 2 years. And my roommate and I have had a few scary experiences. It was around 4 in the morning when we were woken from a dead sleep by a fire alarm going off throughout our entire 4-story apartment building. Seeing as this place is occupied mostly by seniors, we figured someone had left a pot on the stove again. I grumbled and blindly grabbed for a blanket last time we had a false alarm. I was left shivering and barefoot on the sidewalk waiting for the fire department. I wasn't about to let that happen again. My roommate and I put on our shoes, grabbed my phone and keys, and we poked our head out of the hallway. Nothing seemed off. The hall was empty. No one else had come out of their apartments yet. Reluctantly, my roommate and I walked down the hallway towards the lobby. We figured that our neighbors would soon follow suit. It was only when we went through the lobby and out the front door that we realized something was actually wrong. A handful of people who had already come out of the building were running and shouting about how the building was actually on fire. We followed them around to the side of the building as more and more people fled in their pajamas. And to our horror, we saw an apartment on the top floor belching out flames. People were frantic, searching for water, a ladder, anything. Someone remarked that there was a lady who lived in that apartment who had mobility issues, and she needed to be rescued now. And where the hell was the fire department? My roommate was quite disturbed by the whole scene, so we decided to go back to the front of the building, away from the fire. On our way, we saw a guy jump off his balcony to the ground. He rolled when he landed, but I think it still really hurt, judging from how he sat on the grass and groaned for a while. He was lucky to be only on the second floor. There was chaos, yelling, screaming, and an odd mix of panic and disinterest, especially among the senior citizens who didn't want to leave the building because using the stairs was so difficult. The fire department arrived much quicker than they ever have before, seeing as this was a real emergency, and it wasn't long before elderly ladies in nightgowns were being rescued via ladders and wheeled off to the hospital next door. At one point, the man who lived below the apartment on fire had a screaming episode at one of the landlords, the one that looked like a walking skeleton with an oxygen tank and a scooter. By the time the fire department got everything under control, it was around 6 or 7 a.m. The sun was up, and people were beginning their morning commute. The fire department had blocked off our whole street, which must have been a pain, and the entire population of the building sat on the curb in pajamas and blankets. Little kids, old people, broke college kids, the works. The community really pulled together that morning. The public bus service gave us a couple of buses to sit and warm up in instead of standing around on the chilly sidewalk. Paramedics handed out blankets and assessed the injured. The people in the surrounding houses were kind enough to bring us water and snacks. One lady brought a serving tray with mugs of tea from her own kitchen and offered it to anyone she could find. My mom came down to rescue my roommate and I, even though she lived an hour outside of town and hadn't even showered yet. She brought us breakfast and a change of clothing, as we didn't know when we'd be allowed back in the building. The most disturbing details of what had just taken place that morning came to us as we were waiting on the bus. Everyone was talking about the fire, of course, but one man had a particular horrifying detail to add. He'd heard through the grapevine that the lady whose apartment caught fire never made it out of the building. Sadly, we suspected as much, with her mobility issues and all. But there was more. The firefighters apparently found her in the hall. She had made it out of her apartment, but couldn't escape the smoke. Whether she died from the smoke or from the burns, we aren't sure. But one thing that man said that sticks with me is that someone said that they stood outside and watched the flames. They heard the woman screaming, "Help me, I'm burning." I've always been afraid of burning to death, and the idea that my neighbor may have had such a horrifying end is deeply disturbing. I know the man who lived below her heard her screaming. He couldn't stop talking about it. I think he ended up with a form of PTSD from this event, and I really don't blame him. We were all brought to a community center where the fire department and emergency response volunteers helped bring some clarity to the situation and told us what to expect. Everyone was very kind and sympathetic to us. Whatever we needed, they provided for us. I think all of that is pretty standard procedure. But still, I was extremely thankful to the kindness of the volunteers. the firefighters, paramedics, and Good Samaritans. It was a pretty surreal to be in the situation like that. We had almost nothing on us. My roommate hadn't thought to grab her phone, so she had to borrow mine to let her family know that she was okay. We had no money, no ID, none of the essentials, and we had no idea how long we would be homeless. I hadn't been so happy to have my mom with me in such a long time. I felt like a scared little girl, even if it didn't show it. We were lucky. The fire happened to be on the opposite end of the building from us. Our unit was totally unaffected, and we were one of the few allowed back into our apartment that same day. The building stunk of smoke for weeks. Even though the fire took place on the 4th floor in a single apartment, the damage was extensive. Even on the ground floor, the walls were blackened with ash. When they attempted to start fixing up the building, they found asbestos on the walls. A few people were forced to move out of their apartments. And we're talking people who had lived there for around 30 years. I remember the night we were allowed back into our apartment. I wanted to box up the most important possessions and keep them in my car, as if I thought the building was going to catch fire again. My home didn't feel safe anymore, and it wouldn't for several weeks. It would take a long time for us to hear anything about what caused the fire. Last I heard, it was a space heater was to blame, but I don't know for sure. In the days that followed, the fire was featured on the front page of the local newspaper. The family that lived just down the hall from us were featured in the picture. The article spelled out details that I had already heard. It labeled the guy that lived down below the fire as a hero for attempting to save the lady upstairs. It was a valiant effort, but there was nothing he could have done without endangering himself. I feel sorry for him, and I often wonder if the guilt keeps him up at night. Sometimes I think about the lady who passed away in this building. I listen to a lot of ghost stories, so I wonder if her spirit haunts this place. Her sudden and horrifying death would be the sort of thing to make a ghost linger on Earth, wouldn't it? So many things left unfinished. Regardless, I hope she's at peace, and I hope that my neighbors have been able to find some semblance of peace as well. 4 months later, we've regained a sense of normalcy. Things are back to how they were before. If you ignore the orange tarps around the side of the exterior, and the restoration vans that come and go every day, and the security guards stationed in the lobby. The damaged wing is still closed while they try and sort out the asbestos situation. But for those of us who live on the other end of the building, things are relatively normal now. I hope that they stay that way. I was 13 years old when this happened to me. So I live in Denmark, and my grandmother lives in Lithuania. So every summer, me and my mom would take a trip over to her and live in our apartment. My mom and I live in another apartment than my grandmother does. So I was playing with my two friends when they were 9 and 5 years old. So they wouldn't speak so much English as I could. But we were playing with a ball at 10 p.m. Then an old woman starts walking over to a bench and starts to stare at us. I didn't think anything about it, so I didn't tell my friends. When she stands up and starts coming towards us, my friends start looking at her. They run up to the door to where the apartment section and hold the door open for me. They start screaming that I should come over to them. I don't know what to do, so I run in a circle to see if the old woman is following me. The next thing made me run over to my friends. She started smiling and staring into my eyes. I started running over to my friends, looking behind, to see if the woman was following me, and she was still following me with that creepy smile. We locked the door and then ran up the stairs and looked out the window to see if the woman was still there, but she had disappeared. We waited at the stairs because she had maybe waited behind the door. We didn't see them from the window. While we were waiting, they had told me that the woman had killed a kid in the neighborhood. It was about time for me to go home anyways. So I opened up the door, looked out the door to see if there was anyone there. There wasn't anybody, so I started to run up to my apartment section. Tried unlocking the door, but it didn't work. I started hearing someone walking towards me. I tried again, and this time it had worked. I started to run up to my apartment door and unlock it with my key. I had gotten in and locked the door. My mom was sleeping, but I didn't want to wake her up to tell her about what had happened, because she had been really tired. So I figured that I would just tell her about it in the morning. So I made something to eat out of the fridge while eating. I had stuck my head outside the window, as it was nighttime, and I like looking up at the stars. When I was done eating, which was about 5 minutes later, I looked down But when I looked down, I saw a woman under the tree. She stared at me with these eyes that said that she wanted to kill me. I froze. I didn't know what to do, as I was only 13 years old. I took the kitchen knife, and I had it on me for the rest of the night. Checked again if the door was locked, and it was. So I went to bed, opening up the door to my bedroom so that I could look at the door to see if anyone was trying to get in. The time went by, and I couldn't have fallen asleep. Then I heard 3 knocks at the door. I slowly started walking towards the door. While I was out of my room, the floor started creaking. I walked over to the door very slowly. I had the kitchen knife in my hand, just in case I would need it. I looked out the peephole. I didn't see anything. Then all of a sudden an eye came out of nowhere and started staring into my eye. I said if she would be here in 1 minute, I would call the cops. I didn't know if she would understand what I was saying, because most of the people that lived around here can't speak English. So I walked into my mom's room, looking to see if she had woken up after I started screaming at the woman. She was still asleep. I walked over to my bedroom, got into my bed. I stayed in my bed for almost 2 hours, afraid to sleep, because I was scared that the woman would try to break in, and if I would fall asleep. I looked at my phone to see what time it was. It was 3 a.m. I was about to fall asleep when the door handle started to try opening, but it just went up and down as the woman behind the door was trying to open up the door. I stayed there. It kept going up and down for like 10 minutes. Then suddenly, it stopped. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I remember was me waking up, and my mom had made some breakfast for me. While we were eating, I told her about what happened to me. She didn't believe me and just said that I must have had a nightmare. Nothing ever happened again with that woman, but it still freaks me out what happened that night. Maybe you're thinking that I am stupid. Why didn't I call the cops? But if I would call the cops, I couldn't speak with them as I don't know how to speak in English. So this happened when I was 12 years old. I was alone in my room, chatting with friends at 2 o'clock in the morning. It was a few days before New Year's, so a lot of people were usually roaming the streets at night, going home from parties and such. My room had these curtains, which if blinds weren't closed, you could see right into my room. On this unfortunate night, I had forgotten to close my blinds. I was sitting in my bed, so any creep could come and peek through my fucking window and see me. Just a little note here. At the time, I lived on the first floor of an apartment complex with my family, in a quiet town in Finland. I was in the middle of a conversation with my best friend when I heard a slight knocking on my window. I ignored it, thinking it was just the cold winter air messing with the window. A few seconds later, I heard the same knock yet again, but louder. This was where I made a big mistake. Me being the paranoid-ass person that I am, did not check what was happening at my window. Just 10 seconds later, someone started violently banging at my window. I was scared shitless. I immediately moved to the corner of my room because at that moment, I realized I had not closed my blinds. The banging got louder and louder. I thought my window was going to break. At that moment, I could have rushed to my parents' room, but I was frozen in place. Soon enough, the man started yelling at my window. It was pretty much inaudible. He was clearly drunk. I could tell by his voice. Then he shouted so loud that I could hear him. Avon si paska ikuna, which roughly translates to open the fucking window. At that moment, I almost started crying, until I heard my neighbor's dog start barking. My neighbor always went on long walks at night with his dog, and thank God he came at the right moment. My neighbor started yelling ferociously, while his dog was still barking out of his mind. I heard them argue for a little while, until it eventually quieted down. I had to wait about 15 minutes until I could check that window. So I have absolutely no idea what happened to the guy banging at my window. He just completely disappeared. And my neighbor never brought it up. At this moment, you might be thinking that it was just a dream. But I swear that this is not a dream. I never told my parents. They still have no idea what happened that night. And they probably never will. This may come off as a pretty tame experience considering the other stuff that's on here. But trust me, I almost shat myself while it was going down. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.